Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm doing an oil pastel drawing of a golden eagle. Let's start. The paper I'm going to be working on is not a sanded paper. This time it's a Fabriano toned paper called clay. And the oil pastels I'm using are the Chinese GSO oil pastels, a relatively unknown brand, but they do work pretty well. So what I want to do here is create an out of focus bouquet background with mostly dark tones, a little bit of green. I also put in a little bit of brownish color. And then create contrast with the main subject. The reference is in the description as usual. I know that I've already done a drawing of this bird before, but it's a very interesting subject and I want to try to draw it in a different medium. And this time it's going to be oil pastel. Oil pastel is not that great when it comes to tiny details and precision, which is why I'm going to do two things. I'm going to make my drawing a little bit more impressionistic, meaning that I'm going to simplify a lot of the shapes and details, and also I'm going to cheat by using colored pencils a little bit for some of the smaller details, because I find it very difficult not to use colored pencils at all when working with oil pastels. The background, like I said, is supposed to be an out of focus darker background, and I mostly blended that with my finger. However, around the edges the fingers are just not precise enough and they will not give you such clean edges, so I'm going to introduce some other tools. For example, here I'm using a tortillon. You can also use blending stumps. You can use them in a variety of ways, and it's a good idea to use multiple tortillons or blending stumps so that you can avoid the muddying of colors where you don't want it. Around the edge I'm going to have some lighter values, but I'll get to that in a minute. For the base color, I'm going to combine a couple of different colors there. I picked up this dull orangey color. I actually thought that it would be a little bit more on the ochreish side, but it turned out to be a little bit more orangey. I don't really know the names of the colors of these pastels. It's all in Chinese, so I can't really help you with that, so I can only describe them. Here I put a little bit of this golden-like ochreish color on top of that to modify the color slightly so that I can bring it to be a little bit closer to the actual color of the eagle's feathers. And here I'm blending that with a blending stump, and at the same time making sure that I get a clean edge between the main subject and the background. This is very important because you want contrast between the main subject and the background, and you want to show where one object ends and where the background begins. There are exceptions. There are places where I will want to maybe fade or blur some of the edges, but I'll get to that eventually. Around the central part of the drawing, mostly around the head where I want most of the focus of the viewer to be, I will want cleaner edges and more contrast, clean edge to value, as some would say. Anyway, here I'm putting in a little bit of lighter value around the upper edge of the head, because that part of the head is exposed to the light, and I use this light beige-like pastel to pull that lighter edge there. I'm going to do the same thing on some of these feathers on the neck, which are kind of sticking out a little bit, giving the neck and the head an interesting shape. And here I'm starting to add some brownish, darker brown tones. This is something like a burnt umber, let's say. So I have to describe the colors to you because, as I've already mentioned, the descriptions or the names of these are in Chinese, and I don't really know what the exact colors are supposed to be called or how they're designated. Anyway, just doing some more blending with a blending stump now, softening some of those marks so that they don't look like ugly lines, and then maybe I can pull some lighter details on top again. The color is now a little bit closer to what I wanted it to be, but still not quite there yet, I suppose. I'm going to have to introduce a little bit of black oil pastel as well for some of the darkest details, because I see some either darker feathers or some darker like shadow areas between groups of feathers. So in order to get those details to look really dark, I have to use a black oil pastel. I did a lot of drawing around the eye there with a black pencil, and now I'm going to use a little trick where I will paint with a tortillon by picking up a little bit of oil pastel, black oil pastel, to draw some of these smaller details. Where I have larger surfaces and larger areas, I can use an oil pastel because edges are not much of an issue. Here I decided to put in the catchlight in the eye first so that it wouldn't become muddied and so that it remains lighter. So I decided to put in some of those lighter colors first, like the yellowish part of the iris, and of course the white of that reflection or that catchlight. And now I'm just going to paint around it with a tortillon by dipping the tortillon into the black oil pastel for those slightly smaller, finer shapes, and just trying to get the overall shape of the eye to look close to what I see in the reference. I will have to simplify some of the things a little bit. So there's like a grayish area around the eye, which I'm just modifying the color in the iris a little bit because it was a little bit too yellowish. I need some orangey and brownish tones in there as well, and I need a little bit of shadow above the, or rather below the eyebrow area, if you want to call it that. So this grayish area around the eye and next to the beak is covered with some tiny feathers that look like black hairs or dark hairs, and I'm going to have to draw those with a pencil, obviously. But first I'm going to establish the base color there, which is a combination of mid-tone and lighter gray. The beak, the top part of it, is kind of yellowish, grayish color. I mixed a light gray with a little bit of yellowish color. Maybe it's a little bit more yellowish in my drawing than it is in the reference, but that's fine. I also drew the nostril, and now I'm just gonna add those tiny darker details, and for that I'm gonna have to use a black colored pencil, because these are really tiny shapes, really thin shapes that look like tiny feathers or like tiny hairs almost, and there's no way I could draw that with an oil pastel, I think. So it's better to use a colored pencil. I normally use the Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils, which are also oil based, so you could say that it's a similar medium, even though obviously colored pencils behave and work completely differently. But they do combine well with oil pastels in my experience. Pretty much all of the oil pastel drawings that I've done so far were basically mixed media drawings, because I included at least a little bit of the colored pencil in all of them. That was especially the case with the Star Wars series of drawings I did last year, but it was also the case with some landscape drawings I did as well in oil pastel. So I always feel like some of these tiny details where you need fine lines, fine details, it's better to use colored pencil. You could probably get away with using just oil pastels, but you wouldn't be able to produce certain smaller details, and you would have to go for an even more of an impressionistic look. My drawing will already be a little bit more impressionistic rather than realistic, but that's sort of what I was planning to do from the get-go, but I will still try to get some of the details with a colored pencil, and some other details I can also try to achieve with a tortillon, like I'm doing here, by blending with that small tortillon and trying to create a small texture on that beak. I also want it to look like maybe there are some irregularities and even scratches there. That also looks pretty nice. And then I'm just going to shade the rest of this whole area here with some darker colors. The neck area is particularly dark because the beak and the head are casting a shadow onto that part of the body, because that part of the body, the neck area and the lower part of the jaw area, is facing away from the light source. It's basically facing down, and the light is coming from above. So the top of the head, the top of the beak, and the shoulder area and the back to the right is going to be catching light from above. But this part, as you can see on the neck, mainly below the head and the jaw, the beak, whatever, will be very dark. So I used a combination of darker brown and even some black there to create that large shadow area. And I think that large shadow area is very important because it will make the whole thing look more three-dimensional. I'm just adding some lighter and even darker touches on that shadow area to add some detail to it. I picked one of the lighter, dull, brownish pastels to pull some indications of lighter feathers in there, or tips of feathers which are sticking out and maybe catching a bit of light. But I feel like the color is a little bit too bright. There's a little bit too much contrast, kind of spoiling that large shadow area. So I decided to rework it mostly by using an ochre colored pencil to refine the appearance of those feathers and to modify the color ever so slightly. I also did a little bit of fidgeting here around the beak area. I can't really make out the exact shape of the beak in my reference. It's kind of blurry, or there's not enough contrast in that area. So here I'm continuing to work with a colored pencil to pull some of these lighter details on the feathers to make them a little bit better defined. But I felt like this area here needed to be just a little bit more darker, so I added a touch of black oil pastel there, and there are some lighter feathers there just below the beak area, and again some tiny darker feathers with a black pencil and stuff like that. So I kind of went back and forth between colored pencil and oil pastel there. You see what the colored pencil does, it actually can do two things. It can scratch away some of the layers of oil pastel if you want to reveal the lighter layer underneath, and it can also add a little bit of color to some of those smaller details. Anyway, I decided to rework this part of the background here to the left because I didn't really like that brownish color in the background, and I felt that it was a little bit too light, and I wanted a bit more contrast on that neck area. And I did the same thing on the other side, just made the background there a little bit darker. Now what you will see is that once I start finishing the rest of the body here to the right, is that I will actually not bother trying to define the edge between the body and the background that much at the bottom. I kind of want some parts of the portrait to blend or fade with the background, into the background rather, and I want cleaner edges and more contrast around the head. So that's kind of a little trick that I often use with portraits with darker backgrounds, where I want the viewer's focus to go right to the central part of the drawing, to the head, or in this case the eye, the beak. So I'm doing the rest of the body here, trying to achieve the same colors that I did on the left side, mixing those brownish and ochreish tones, adding some darker details with a black oil pastel for those darker feathers and those shadow areas between the feathers, adding a little bit of darker brown, and then kind of muddying that and blending that with my finger, because I am trying to simplify the feathers a little bit. I'm not a big fan of drawing feathers. I think I mentioned that in a number of my videos. So when I draw birds, I will often try to simplify things a little bit, so that I don't have to so that I don't really have to draw every single feather. So I simplified it a little bit. I finished the rest of the background and added a little bit more shadow here and there with a black oil pastel to increase the contrast between the lighter sides and the shadow sides, and added a touch of lighter pastel around the edges to increase that contrast with the background a little bit more. Finally, the drawing is finished. I put my signature on the left side, and I hope you like it. Let me know what you think and check out my other videos. But if you want to see the full-length version of the video and a lot more content, you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye bye.